Welcome to Kiffin's Keep, an intellectual resource for the pillar and buttress of the truth, which is the church. This is a project of the London Lyceum, which is all about serious thinking for a serious church. I'm Jordan Stefaniak, president of the London Lyceum and host of Kiffin's Keep. And as always, I'm excited to be here with you guys today. And as a reminder, as always, if you're new to the show, go ahead and click like to the episode if you enjoyed it. Hit the share button if you want to share it with your friends. But as always, go ahead and click the subscribe button and give me a comment as well if you agree, disagree, or if you have thoughts or other ideas for future shows. Love to hear those. Now, today I want to get into the new organization of the show for a little bit, to where there's a little bit more order to the episodes that are coming out. And today we're going to be doing a review of sorts. Now, when I do book reviews, I don't just do, here's exactly what the book says. It's supposed to be evaluative and to be a springboard to other topics and ideas. So we'll see how this goes. Tell me what you guys think, if this is a useful format. If you have books that you'd like me to review as well, go ahead and drop those in the comments below, and I will make sure to try to get to them if I haven't read it. Obviously, it's going to take me longer to get there than it would if I have read it. So the first one I'm starting off with is the one that I just finished a couple of days ago, and that's why it's on the list. And plus, I think it offers some interesting launching pads of things to talk about. And the book is And Was Made Man from Robin le Poidevin. And if I pronounced his last name wrong, I am very, very sorry, Robin. I apologize in advance. Now, I will give you a, 45-second overview of the book before we really dig into the content. So if you didn't catch it from the title, it's supposed to be reflections on the incarnation, particularly the metaphysics of things like just the feasibility of the incarnation. Is it metaphysically coherent? Is it logically coherent? And then dealing with different problems that arise from that. So the first half of the book, let's see here. How much is that? It's actually a short book. It's from Oxford University Press. So I would recommend probably not purchasing it because it's expensive. And that's just across the board for all Oxford books. I don't think it's wise to purchase them unless you get a review copy, this is what I have. This is here is a review copy, which is a shock from Oxford. So the first, 22 pages is, what is the incarnation? And then you have the two big sections on incarnational models, which goes for roughly 90 pages before you have some of the key, in his mind anyway, problems for the incarnation. And he runs through four main problems that run the rest of the book, about another 90 pages. So you have problems of divine embodiment. How is it that an immaterial thing can become material? The problem of necessity. How is it that God, who is supposed to be necessary, can then become man and die? What makes sense of that? Christ in the ground of goodness, and then the times of God incarnate. And so, yeah, I will tell you, I think Robin is a very lucid writer. He writes clearly. He's organized. He writes succinctly, which to me, when you can write clearly and succinctly on difficult topics, that tells me you've probably been teaching for a significant period of time to hone your skills. A lot of us, when we're early on and learning and working on things, what should take 2 pages takes 10 pages just because we've got all this knowledge that we feel like is necessary, but it's not actually necessary. Robin does a really, really nice job of keeping things as concise as possible and yet not missing anything. So I found the book very useful from that standpoint. He gives several areas to where he's covering the metaphysics of time, the metaphysics of something else, or the different incarnational models even. He's able to give useful and succinct definitions of these different terms in a very small way. So commend Robin for that aspect of it. Now, I've got to mention a couple of things about Robin before we jump into more evaluative nature. Now, so I guess I did say he's a very good writer and he's very organized. So from that standpoint, the book is well written. Though it is important to note that Robin is an agnostic, and so he's approaching the book from that framework. He's not approaching the incarnation as if, is this true or not? He's saying, is it coherent or not? Which are two different questions, and he mentions that. I should mention his thesis. So I keep holding the book up. So I guess if you're listening on podcast, I'm sorry, but you could see this beautiful cover. No, there's no cover. It's a joke. There actually is a nice looking cover, but it's a dust jacket. And I throw those away. So if you're one of those people who is a freak who likes to keep their dust jacket on, you can comment and tell me how wrong I am. But I think I'm right, and I think you're the crazy one. So Robin advocates what's called a kenotic Christology. And it's really, in its simplest form, is a form of Christology where the divine Son must give up something in order to become human. He must give up something of his divinity. Maybe it's very small. Maybe it's for a short period of time. Maybe it's a lot of stuff. Whatever kenotic view you have, you're giving up something when you become incarnate. Now, for Robin, he ends up suggesting that it's possible, given his kenotic model, for God to give up omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, immateriality, self-sufficiency, and meta-ethical status. So that's what he advocates for in this book as the best solution to these different incarnational problems. To give up all of those things. Yeah, that to me, that's a significant, why be a Christian anymore? I mean, of course, obviously, in Robin's case, I don't think that's not really something that's really on his mind. That's not a desiderata, if that's the right word for what it means to have a good theory of the incarnation. So, that's how he's working through this. So a couple of things I want to comment on as far as the content of the book. The first thing I did note was that there's a couple of times in here, which this is just something that I find annoying in a lot of books, to where it's someone who's not a theologian, or maybe they're not a biblical scholar, and they'll make a biblical, scholarly, or theological point, and then they back off and say, well, you know what, you can't get mad at me because I'm not really a theologian, I'll let the theologians handle that. To me, that's sort of like I want to have my cake and eat it too, right? If you're going to make a theological point, then you should be able to stand up behind it and say, that's the point I want to make. And if you think that somebody else should handle that, then you should let them handle it and not pretend to do it yourself and then blame them for if you got it wrong. I see this a lot for specialists who are not theologians. They'll try to make theological points. They'll write theological books. And then you end up getting this, well, I'm not a theologian, so you can't blame me for making mistakes. I'm like, no, I can blame you for making a mistake. You put it in print, either stand by it or don't. So that's just a small frustration. Generally, that's not just Robin. He doesn't do that a lot, but that's a trigger thing for me that it really bothers me. So second thing is, again, I mentioned all of the different things that God has to give up on his account. I don't think any Christian wants to really do that, except for maybe the most radically revisionary sort of Christian. And he also makes a couple of other claims that I find very crazy. So he says he accepts a form of social Trinitarianism where the three persons of the Trinity have, their own self-consciousness and own will or distinct center of consciousness, whatever. And he thinks that you shouldn't take relative identity. He thinks relative identity is a terrible route to take, and so you have to take strict identity, which, if you're not into philosophy, these are just different philosophical ways of cashing out numerical identity. And he's saying, look, you have to keep classical identity, and if you keep classical identity and you take social Trinitarianism, you're a tritheist. And he says we're better off being tritheists because we don't want to give up on this version of logic. I think that's a really steep pill to swallow. And then he also mentions how elements of Arianism are impossible to avoid on his view. Again, I guess he doesn't feel the weight of that. I do. And I think most Christians would, to say, I don't want to be an Arian. That's a first order heresy. So I don't think, if you're looking for a book that you say, I want to recommend the content of this book, this is not the one for you. Particularly for those of you who probably watch this, except for like maybe one or two of you who are weirdo nerds. And with all the love and affection in my heart, we can go grab coffee later and have some fun talking about it, but I think you're crazy. And third, Poidevin, he makes some interesting claims in here that I think are just unsubstantiated or just really weird. So he says the creation of free beings is thus a kenotic act insofar as it involves a stepping back from full control of the created order. He says a couple of other things around this, but it essentially seems to say that if you want to have libertarian free will, God can't causally act. And I just think that's fundamentally a misunderstanding of how libertarians, at least in older periods, have thought of causal interaction with the divine. It's not like a one-to-one zero-sum game where if God pushes, then no one else can push. And if I push, then no one else can push. It's not a zero-sum game. God's causal activity, in a sense, transcends our causal activities, and there's different various senses of causation. So I thought that was just a very flat-footed and odd way to sort of pin libertarians that way, and I don't think that's fair to them. I don't think that's consistent. He also, in his chapter on divine embodiment, I was really looking forward to it because I've been doing research and writing on this, and he gave a couple of theories of divine omnipresence, and I was very dissatisfied with them. So he gives three. One is called occupation, one's called identity, and one's called knowledge and power. Occupation would be God is omnipresent by virtue of occupying every region of space. Identity, God's omnipresent by being identical to space. And then knowledge and power, God's omnipresent in sort of an analogical sense. He has direct knowledge of and power over every region of space and its contents. Now, knowledge and power is that's, I think, a very Thomistic way to think about omnipresence. It's very ubiquitous throughout the tradition. You see a lot of people saying, yes, give me knowledge and power, and that's omnipresence. Identity, I guess you have, I think, who is it? It's not Einstein. It's Isaac Newton, who thinks God is identical to space. And then, he has this other, the occupancy thing that just, this is not cashing out all the views that you have in omnipresence by any sense. If he had just read Ross Inman's stuff, who's been published in Oxford, who also has this wonderful essay that I'm pulling out here in this nice T&T Clark Handbook to Analytic Theology, where he's talking about divine immensity and omnipresence, and he's cashing out these different senses of fundamental presence and derivative presence, where the derivative presence would be akin to the sort of knowledge and power way of thinking about omnipresence. But he also gives this fundamental presence where there's this cause or this relationship to space that isn't just occupancy. It's different than that, and it's also, you can find that throughout the tradition. He has a longer essay that was published in the Oxford Studies in Philosophy of Religion or something like that on this, and he's showing Anselm and Augustine and others who have a sense of omnipresence like that. I just thought, this is crazy that this is being published by Oxford University Press, and there's not even a footnote to Inman, who's done a lot of work on this. There's not been a lot of academic works on omnipresence, so it's very shocking to not engage all of the literature on that for an academic monograph of this sort. So, when it comes to recommending a book, you've got to, at least for me, there's a couple of diagnostic questions of, do I recommend this, yes or no? And for a particular book like this, it is designed as a monograph, an academic monograph. So I would assume that most people who are going to be reading this are academics. And if it's an academic reading this, then there is a sense in which, yeah, maybe I would recommend it, because it's very clear, it's well argued, it's well written, except for some areas where I think the argument's very, very poor. I follow the lines of arguments. I just reject the premises that are accepted, if that makes sense. So I think I would, in some senses, recommend the book and say, yes, it is worthwhile to read and to engage. So in that sense, I would say, if you're an academic, yes, I think the book is worthwhile. I think there's some squirrely stuff going on. I think it's crazy, but I did enjoy reading it. He's a great writer, and he does deal with some common problems that you find throughout all the literature, and he's trying to blend a little bit of philosophy of mind and metaphysics of the incarnation, which is stuff that I've been working on quite a bit. So for me, I enjoyed the book, and I found it helpful, at least in spurring some ideas or questions, or showing me some dead ends and showing me some intuitions that other people have that I don't have, and to think through why they think the way they think, and to spot the problems in the arguments. Now, if you're a pastor, or if you're just a graduate student, or if you're a church member, like, I'm going to think about this book differently for that particular person. And if you're a regular church member, I'm probably not going to be recommending a academic monograph to begin with, so it would be out for that. If you're a pastor, you have limited time and resources to read, so I would say there are some sections in here that are especially helpful and concise, and can give you a lay of the land on things. I know I mentioned the philosophy of time stuff, but that last chapter, he went through 4 different options of the philosophy of time in like 3 pages. And it was just tremendous. And he's giving you sort of like costs and benefits and everything. I'm like, how in the world did you do this in such a succinct manner? This is actually a really useful tool that I'll return to as I think about what are the models of time? How should I concisely explain them? I can go back to Poidevin's book here and find that and utilize that for other things that I'm doing. So in that sense, it's useful. But for a pastor, I would say, no, probably not. This isn't the book for you. For a graduate student, if you're researching this area, it might be useful. It's a contemporary book. It's covering material at the intersection of a couple of different disciplines that you don't find all that often. So in some sense, it may be very useful for research and study and for as a sparring partner if you are a confessional Christian of any sort, or even a Christian who just confesses the Nicene Creed. He's got that whole first chapter talking about sort of a Chalcedonian understanding. I think he's very deficient in that, but he's trying his best to say what would a Chalcedonian approach to the incarnation look like. He did have a really nice section on, I guess, why you should be Orthodox. I think he totally misses it, obviously. I think he had a nice section on period or contemporary metaphysics. You get this really nice illustration where I guess there's a school of thought that instrumental music from a given period, such as the 18th century, or take your pick, maybe, I don't know, 90s punk rock or something, should be played on period instruments. Now, I've never met anybody who thinks this, but this is for, if there really are these people, then this is a nice illustration. The result may be an aesthetic experience that entirely justifies the historical approach, but if the argument is that only a performance on period instruments can be truly authentic, then it's open to the objection that we cannot listen to it with period ears, blah, 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 blah. He goes on to link this to people who are thinking about sort of what does it mean to be to affirm Chalcedon. Must you take all of the metaphysical views that you find in the 5th century in order to be truly Chalcedonian, or can you sort of grab bag a little bit in order to support what's actually said in the creed? I think that's a really nice illustration to think through, like, must we be contained in this particular period, or are we capable of utilizing contemporary resources and such? So that's a brief review of this book. Hopefully that's helpful. I would love it if you guys told me what books you'd like me to talk through and review a little bit. I'm happy to engage substantially in particular aspects of some books, or just cursorily, like I feel like I did with this one. I pointed out a couple of things that I think are squirrely and weird and bad. Obviously, if you want to have a book that supports tritheism and Arianism and stuff, this is your book. I think that's bad, very bad news. That's extremely bad news. But it's well written, because when I think about a book, again, diagnostic questions, there's a couple of like threshold bars. Is it well written? Is it well argued? If it's not, then I'm not wasting my time, unless it's one of those like extremely important books that everybody has to read. So if like you're doing gender studies, you got to read Judith Butler's Gender Trouble. I think it's a horrible book. It's a horrible book for a lot of reasons, more than just what it advocates for. It's horrible because it's terribly written and terribly confusing. And I think it's done that way on purpose. But that's beside the point. You have to read it if you want to do gender stuff at an academic level. So even though it's not well written, even though it's not well argued, you're stuck reading it. But for the most part, you can say if it's not well written or not well argued, ignore it. Unless for some reason it's in your own like little academic pool. If it's not, then you just safely do ignore it. Now I have no idea where I was going with this, other than my diagnostic questions, and if I recommended a book. I know I was talking about how I can review a book. I guess there's lots of ways, like I mentioned. So just tell me what you want me to read, what you want me to review, and I'll do it. And I appreciate you guys sticking around. I know that I've been a little bit more spotty lately because I, just had a baby, and that's been tough. That sort of event. Having children is awesome and wonderful, but sometimes they can mess up your recording schedule a little bit. Like my 4-year-old just walked out of his bed, so I'm gonna go get him. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in. And to be clear, I love kids. They're the best thing in the world. It's so much fun. though sometimes it's difficult to keep up with my recording schedule for you guys. So I hope this was useful, and I'll talk to you guys soon. I look forward to thinking with you then. Hey guys, one more thing actually before we go. I'm back, and I totally forgot to cover this, and I think it's important to cover just because I don't know how many other chances I'm going to have to address a book that's written by an agnostic about Christian philosophy or Christian theology or Christian doctrine. There's a couple of important things in here. So I guess when you think about an agnostic, what can they know about Christianity, and what can they accurately perceive or argue about Christianity? You've got really, I think, two sort of realms. They're not just totally distinct, but you think, I don't know why I just clicked my pen as if I'm going to draw something to where you can see it, but that's what I was about to do. You could, and here I am drawing with my pen, you could think about things like God's eternal power that you find in Romans 1. Paul's talking about eternal power. The Gentiles, even they can conceive of this in some sense, his divine nature, his eternal power. What is that? Romans 1:19. And you could say, well, yeah, an agnostic can get a sense for God is really powerful, he's really strong, or maybe it's just traditional natural law arguments, don't murder. Agnostics can get to understanding that clearly. But then you take it to that next level of the revelatory sort of stuff, and you think, okay, there is incarnation, atonement, Trinity, these sort of things that are divine revelation alone, really, that you could not come to a conclusion on apart from it. Can an agnostic know that and know it accurately or present it accurately? Lots of interesting sort of intertwined questions in here. There's people who want to say agnostic can't know anything really across the board, which I think is not that's incoherent. That's incompatible with what Romans 1 even teaches there. You see even Psalm 19, or is it Psalm 19? I think it's Psalm 19, other places where really everybody across the board, they recognize and they understand something of it. They understand something of the truth of whatever it is they're talking about. But when you move to that next level of its incarnation or its Trinity, that's even more like only Christians should be able to understand this, right? And tell me what you think. So first, before I give my opinion, drop a comment in the comments below. Let me know, can an agnostic, number one, I guess maybe just can they accurately present material on Christian doctrines like the Trinity and the Incarnation? Is that even possible? I think it is possible. I think even the demons believe and tremble. So even the demons know Incarnation, Trinity sort of things, I would think. I think that's what James seems to imply there, right? Even the demons believe that God is one, and they shudder. Is that what it says? I think that's what it says. And so you've got this point here where you have to acknowledge that somebody who's not a Christian, somebody who's clearly against Christianity, knows something of the truth of who God is. So I think agnostics can know things, and they can know things truly, though I think there's obviously going to be a lack and a disorder. So naturally, prior to becoming a Christian, your mind is extremely disordered. It's darkened. It's foolish. So even if it does come to a grasp and clearly and articulately present something, there's going to be things that are missing. So I do think an agnostic can accurately and fairly present something, say Chalcedonian Christology, and yet I do think there's something missing, even intellectually. It's not just a sort of an act of the will where they want to reject it. They may intellectually understand it and know it. They reject it at a heart level. I guess when I think about the demons, that's probably what's going on there. They would intellectually know more than I know. They would intellectually know more than, I guess, most any Christian would know, and yet they're rejecting it in their hearts. And so, in theory, an agnostic could do the same. But that just doesn't seem to sit right as I think about it. I don't know. You tell me what you guys think. So I don't have a problem reading or thinking along with an agnostic or even an atheist. I think they can make valid arguments, make sound arguments, and point things out. They're just obviously going to be missing. They don't care about Scripture the same way. They're not sort of immersed in the life of the church, confessing the creed each week and praying, and doing the different things that are liturgically shaping our eyes and our minds and our hearts as we read Scripture, as we think theologically. So the different moves that we make, that we're going to be moved to by the Spirit to make, just aren't going to be in their repertoire. So they're going to be missing significantly important things. And yet I think they still can accurately present and portray things. I don't know. You tell me what you guys think. Anyway, as always, thanks for tuning in. This is Kiffin's Keep, and I look forward to thinking with you guys soon. For the second time. Thank you.